Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Dottie Gallagher, the President and CEO of the Buffalo Niagara Partnership, and I'm very pleased to have you all here with us today to talk about New York State's Shared Work Program, how to retain employees during a slowdown. So we're going to get started with our presenters, and I just briefly want to thank them for being with us. We have learned from a number of our employers that the Shared Work Program has been really valuable at this difficult time to retain workers, loyal and committed workforce. So with us today, we have Emily Berger, the HR generalist for Alcott HR. Emily, thank you for being with us again. And Matthew Miller, who's a partner at Rupp, Base, Pfaltzgraff, and Cunningham. In today's program, we're going to go through the sort of nuts and bolts of shared work, how you would apply it and the benefits of it within your workplace, and hopefully answer any questions you have. And I will say before we kick this off with the first question, you can submit your questions in the Q&A if you just scroll down to the bottom bar, you'll see it there. And I would suggest that if you see a question that looks similar to the one you want to ask, upvote it, just click like, and then those questions will move to the top of the list. We oftentimes run out of time to answer all of the questions. So go ahead and do that, and we'll make sure we get the most burning questions answered for you during our time today. So Matt and Emily, let's get started. I think, Matt, I want to start with you and have you walk us through really the main benefits of the Shared Work Program.
Of course. Thank you, Dottie, and good morning to you and to Emily and to everybody who has joined us today. Thanks for the opportunity, and hopefully this will be enlightening to you if you're considering or just learning about this program for the first time. The program has a lot of benefits. First and foremost, it's designed principally to be a great alternative to layoffs during any economic downturn. So notice, for example, that I said any economic downturn. I didn't just say during this COVID-19 pandemic. This program has been around for some time. It wasn't created just for this, like many other state and federal programs have. So it's tested and tried and true, but it can be utilized specifically during this pandemic, and I'm going to lay out some of the benefits of it for you. One is, of course, you can avoid layoffs by reducing hours and wages of either all employees, a group of employees, or multiple groups of employees, and they can be at different levels, and we'll talk on that about that in a moment. Those employees then can receive partial unemployment benefits to supplement the reduction in their wages. Now, it won't make them entirely whole, but it will come awfully close. And there's another part of that I'll touch on later in today's webisode as well. That may actually exceed what they otherwise normally would make. It helps employees also, and I know many of you are employees on this, but also business owners and employers. First and foremost, it does help the employees, of course, by sparing them the typical hardships that come along with losing their jobs. You know, no COBRA triggering event, you know, the loss of fringe benefits goes away like would normally happen on a termination or a layoff event. And the fear of the unknown, you know, they've got their job, they're still employed, they're coming into work, albeit on a reduced basis. And they've got more money in their pocket than they otherwise would have through a normal layoff situation. And then you, as a business owner, of course, as an employer, there's a myriad benefits. You know, you avoid the burdens of what comes with a layoff. You retain your loyal, talented, already trained employees. And what often goes overlooked, that I see is the positive impact that a program like this can have on company and culture and morale, employee morale. You know, they understand when it's communicated to them properly that they're not losing their jobs. They often understand the business need to do it, but they appreciate the ability to keep their jobs, to make up some of that difference in benefits. And now with a new program in place at the federal level, they'll actually often exceed it. So that helps when you get back up to speed by eliminating a lot of onboarding costs, training, recruiting, things of that nature. So there really are a lot of benefits. It's designed to be that way, and you can realize those when you do this properly.
Yeah, let's go on to the next question. So let's talk specifically about what does a plan require of an employer?
Sure, of course. So let me preface this by saying, this shared work program is designed, of course, to be flexible, and it is. I've seen that in practice, but just like any program, there are requirements. So let's talk about some of what those are. Number one, it can apply and must apply only to employees who normally work 40 hours a week or less. Number two, you got to reduce the work hours and the corresponding wages only between percentages of 20% and 60%. So for example, if you reduce a group of employees hours and wages by 10%, it doesn't qualify. If you do it by 70%, 60% or more, I should say, it doesn't qualify. Number three, you've got to replace essentially what would otherwise be a layoff of an equal percentage of the employees that you're putting in the plan. So in other words, if you were planning on, or your business needs to lay off 25% of your workforce or 25% of a department, then the plan should be the equivalent percentage of those people being put on the program or the plan. Number four, it keeps fringe benefits in place. Now there's a qualification in that. You can reduce or eliminate those fringe benefits if there's a need to do so, but only if those benefits are also reduced or eliminated for the rest of your entire workforce. In other words, it can't be discriminatory. You can't single out those people that you put in the plan. That would raise a whole nother, tangled web of problems. And that's a benefit, I think, to employers that often, gets overlooked. So, number five, it can't extend beyond 53 weeks. So there's an ending point to it. And number six, it covers all employees in an affected quote unquote unit. And it reduces their hours all by the same percentages for everybody that's in that unit. So you can't, as I said earlier, it can apply to either a group of employees or multiple groups of employees, but those percentages can change between different groups or units, not within the same unit. So, generally, I would say, another requirement is you can't hire new employees to work in the unit or the group that you've got covered by the plan while it's in effect, unless you're hiring to replace somebody that was part of that plan that left to go work for somebody else. And I think, Emily may touch on that a little bit later on. And then also for those of you who have a unionized workforce, this is important. If there is a collective bargaining agreement in place, the collective bargaining unit must agree to take part in the shared work program. This is going to take time. It'll take planning. It'll require negotiation, and it, of course, will require cooperation from the CBU. So if this is something you're contemplating and you do have some unionized workers that you anticipate being part of the plan you'd like to develop, keep that in mind and get out ahead of that to start that conversation with the CBU.
Matt, before we move on to the next question, just can you help define what you think unit means? Is that like by a department or by a function? Like how do you define unit? Is it shift? What is it?
That's a good question, and I think we actually have a slide a little bit later that will address it, but I'm happy to talk about it now. People often misperceive or misunderstand and think that requires that it's a specific, specifically labeled or pre-existing department, so to speak, within a company. For example, a billing department or an accounting department, so to speak. It can be that, but it doesn't have to be. These units are created by you, the business, as you come up with this plan, and it only has to have 2 employees or more. It can't have a single employee in it, but you can create multiple units of multiple different groups of employees. What I often suggest is don't try to create a unit that has, for example, a chief administrative officer in it and some, a lower level group of employees that don't have similar job responsibilities or similar requirements. I would try to keep it consistent among those people at the same job level or even at the same shift, so to speak.
Thank you so much. Okay, Emily, I'd like to go to you now. Why don't you talk to us about who can participate in the shared work program?
Right. So both non-exempt and exempt employees can participate in the program, as well as full-time and part-time employees. One thing I do want to mention, though, is that if you are going to have exempt employees participating in the program, you want to make sure you work with your HR or payroll to make sure that you are staying compliant with the FLSA. So it may be in your best interest to, for that time being, convert any exempt employees to possibly non-exempt, so that you don't have to worry about docking an exempt employee's pay, or there's no concern over going below that minimum salary threshold for exempt employees in New York State. Also, the plan is based on a 40-hour or less work week. So if an employee's work week is typically over 40 hours, they would not be eligible for the plan. Another caveat is that in order to be eligible for the shared work benefit, an employee also needs to be eligible for regular unemployment benefits, meaning they need to have at least 6 months or 2 quarters of wages in the past 5 quarters. However, there is no maximum compensation that someone can make in order to be eligible for the program, which is a benefit because there is a maximum threshold for getting regular unemployment benefits.
Emily, tell us when will the shared work plan begin and how long can it last?
So if approved, the plan is going to start either on the start date that you put on the application or the Monday following the approval date, whichever comes later. You may submit your application. You have to submit your application less than 1 month before the start date, but at least 1 week before the start date. Also, the employer's plan can only be 53 weeks, and these plans cannot be retroactive. One thing we want to mention, though, is that an employee may only receive 26 weeks of the shared work benefit in addition to any other federal benefits they may be eligible for in that benefit year. Also, an employee may not receive more in a benefit year from shared work benefits combined with regular unemployment benefits than he or she would have regularly received from the unemployment program alone. So that's going to be 26 times the benefit rate. One thing I do want to mention, though, is that in terms of approval of these plans, we are noticing that they're being approved very quickly. So typically, let's say you were to apply on a Thursday, the soonest the plan could start would be 2 Mondays from then. However, we have been seeing that when you submit, let's say on a Thursday, these plans are being approved in 1-2 days, sometimes the same day, and then they're being approved with a start date of that following Monday. So very, very quickly, which is a very nice thing that we've been seeing since, people want to make sure that their employees are receiving this benefit.
That's great. So someone goes through, completes the application, submits it to the Department of Labor. What happens after they submit their application?
So once you submit your application, you're going to get an email as a confirmation. You want to make sure you save that email. It has information that will be important later on. Once you're approved, then you're going to get another email saying that you've been approved. It's going to have an information letter in there, as well as some important information for you and your employees. So one of the documents that's included is instructions for your employees. They're great. They're very step-by-step. It's going to tell them how to submit their claim during their first week, as well as how to certify, whether they're doing that online or via paper. If as the employer you do decide that you want them to certify each week via paper, then there's also links in that email for the waiting week and continued claim certification forms. Also, to make it easier when you're applying, the DOL has allowed you to upload your participant information via an Excel spreadsheet. However, it does have to be formatted properly, and I can say from experience that sometimes, even with the instructions they provide, it takes a couple tries to get that format exactly right. So if you can't get it formatted properly, or maybe you're not very familiar with Excel, you don't use it, unfortunately, your only other option is uploading that information manually. However, if you only have a handful of employees, it's a pretty straightforward process.
Emily, why is the Excel format tricky? What makes it confusing?
It has to be saved as a CSV file. Also, there's very particular ways that each of the columns need to be formatted, and whether they're tagged as general or in number format. And so if you're extremely Excel savvy, you use it all the time, it may be very easy for you to know those different settings you have to change to get it formatted properly. However, maybe you're someone who just has beginner knowledge of Excel. It may be a little more complicated to get that formatted properly. So maybe you know someone who's Excel savvy, maybe you bring them in if you have a lot of employees you want to upload.
That's good advice. Save somebody a lot of pain there.
Yeah.
Matt, let's go to you. What is required of the employer and the employees once you've been approved and are on the plan?
Sure, I like this question because it's not simply apply, get approved, and off you go with no continuing obligations. As with any of these programs or most of these programs, there is some administrative work and back office work that comes along with it. And so we're going to explain what that is. First, for your employees, if they don't have an existing unemployment claim already through the state, they must file their initial claim during the first reduced week of work under the plan. If they don't, then their benefits are going to be delayed. So you'll probably hear about that, of course. So if an employee, fails to do that during the first week, you'll hear about it. But of course, if they don't do it quickly enough, the claim's not going to have the correct effective date. There's going to be a delay in processing on at the state side of it, and their payment of benefits won't come through as quickly as they otherwise would. They can do it online. Of course, there's a website for this, labor.ny.gov/sign-in. I highly recommend doing it this way, at least in the first instance. And actually, they do have to do it that way if they want their benefits direct deposited into their bank account. That's the only option. The other option, if they don't want a direct deposit or they can't do it online for some reason, it can be done through the automated phone system in the first instance. Obviously, unemployment is overwhelmed at the moment. It may take some time. I advise against that. But there's some other various things. I think, Emily, you have something that you wanted to chime in on with that as well.
Yeah, so one thing that we want to make sure everyone understands is that even if you do go through the online option for this, for submitting your claim, we have found that you do still have to finish the claim by calling in. And as Matt just said, we are noticing very high volumes and it's taking a long time to get through. Sometimes employees aren't able to get through. So if you call and you aren't able to get through in order to finish your claim, just hang tight. They have said that someone should get back to you within 72 hours to finish that. If you don't hear from someone with 72 hours, you are welcome to try calling back, or we do know that they have been a little delayed, so it's possible they may just call you in the next day or two after that.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. And so here's a really important part. Once you're all set up and you and your employees included in the plan are ready to go, you both must certify on a weekly basis throughout the pendency of the plan that it remains in place and that each one of your employees remains eligible for those benefits. Each employee must complete the certification. So now generally there would have been a mandatory waiting period of a week, but the state has waived that as long as the employees, when filling out their initial application, say that it's because of COVID-19 that they're filing the initial claim. And these certifications can be done online or they can be done by snail mail, but you as the employer do have the ability to decide which method will be used. We of course recommend online, but everyone in the plan, including the employer, must use the same method. So what method you choose to certify may depend in some circumstances on the sophistication of your workforce, whether they have the ability to do it online. You could help them potentially do that, but the processing of claims will take longer, of course, if snail mail is used. And just keep in mind that when you're certifying, you and your employees throughout the plan, that the benefits are always claimed for the prior week of work. So that means in any given week, you and your employees will be certifying for the work that they performed during the previous week.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Emily, can you help us understand, can you lay off some workers who were originally in your shared work plan and keep the remainder of the plan? Keep the remainder in the
Yes.
plan, I should say?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So the intent of the shared work program is to avoid layoffs. So if you have to do some layoffs, but you are still able to keep some employees because of the shared work plan, then you're still meeting the intent of the program. However, maybe you're only doing a 20% reduction right now. Maybe you want to consider moving to a 40, 50, 60% reduction if you want to try to avoid any layoffs altogether. Also, though, just remember, in order to keep the shared work plan intact, or at least keep a unit intact, it needs to have at least 2 people in the unit.
So just to clarify, Emily, what you're saying is if someone has applied for shared work with a 20% reduction, at any point in that plan, they can change the percentage as long as it's not over 60%?
Correct. So let's say you do a couple weeks at 20% and then you realize, you know what, we really need to reduce these hours more. You can then reduce to any other percentage as long as it doesn't go above 60%. You just want to make sure that you go in and you update your plan, and then when you're doing your weekly certifications, you would make that change as well.
Excellent. Emily, once the shared work plan is in effect, can you hire a replacement for an employee who leaves to work elsewhere?
Yes. So Matt did mention this a little bit earlier. The law only prohibits you from adding a new hire or additional employees into the shared work program, because obviously you are using the shared work plan to reduce hours because you're trying to avoid layoffs. So it doesn't make much sense to then be hiring more workers. However, you can hire someone to replace someone else. So let's say that, you know, someone left or quit, you can hire someone to replace them and add them right into the plan.
Matt, how many work units can you create? We're back to the work unit question again.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm glad we're back on it again, because it's a typical subject that causes a lot of confusion among my clients, and I think in the business community in general. And frankly, it's one of the hardest questions that I get asked to answer for my clients as they go through this process. It really requires me and the business to know the ins and outs of that business and how employees work and when. But everybody just needs to remember that this program is designed and intended to be flexible. And in practice, I've found and have seen that it has been and that it is. I think Emily would attest to that as well. So you can submit a single plan for all employees in one unit, like a company-wide reduction, if that's justified, it's a business need. But if you don't need to do that, I often recommend, and the DOL has even come out and said they agree with this approach, creating multiple smaller units if you need to put a plan in place for various units throughout your company. For example, particular job descriptions, particular shifts, or particular hours shifts. Doing that will allow you, the business, to the flexibility to reduce or to not reduce employees as your business needs dictate. So, you know, if you've got a particular division or department of your company that just isn't busy right now because of COVID-19, but others are, you can use it to create a unit for that division, that department or unit, reduce their hours by a percentage, and keep the others running. Or if the others have a less of a reduction than you know, the first department, you can create those at different percentages. So, you know, again, just briefly to touch on what I said earlier, they don't have to exist prior to the plan being in place. These units can be created at the time you're putting this plan together and applying for the program online or in paper. Anyone you create just needs to have at least 2 employees.
Excellent. I'm going to go a little off script here. I just want to make a point to our listeners that one of the things that we were hearing from employers who are using this plan is to avoid losing employees who would prefer to be on unemployment because they can make more money, or because they feel safer or whatever, that this has been used not only to reduce the expense, but to actually be a really good retention strategy for key members of the workforce that they want to retain. So it's particularly, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, particularly in this environment, it has turned out to be one of the better tools that employers have right now. So let's go on to question number 10, and this one's for Emily. Can you hire people back and immediately utilize the shared work plan?
So the answer to that is it depends. If you did layoffs or furloughs and didn't have a shared work plan intact prior to that, then when you're bringing these people back, you do still need to apply for the shared work plan as you would in any other situation, assuming, as we talked about previously, you meet the requirements that we talked about and you check all those boxes. And it does still need to be approved by the Department of Labor. Also, as we mentioned, shared work plans cannot be retroactive. However, we did talk about a scenario earlier where maybe you had a shared work plan intact, you laid off some employees but kept some on the shared work plan. When those employees come back off of layoff or furlough, as long as the shared work plan is still intact, you can bring those employees right back onto the shared work program, which does bring me to one other thing that I want to mention. If you have employees in that situation where they were on a shared work plan, they're going off, they were laid off, furloughed, and they're going on to regular unemployment, you do need to make sure that you communicate to the shared work department that these employees need to be moved to regular unemployment once they've been paid for their last week of shared work. It would be beneficial for the employees also to reach out on via the phone or online to let the shared work department know, but you should also be letting them know on your end as an employer. So just a couple things to keep in mind.
Excellent, thank you. Question number 11, and Matt, before you answer, I just want to let you know that this is a similar question. Is one of the highest voted questions from our listeners right now. What if you already received PPP funds and the New York State DOL does not approve your plan immediately? How does that impact forgiveness? And Bill Patty asked similarly, how can you utilize the shared work program and still acquire forgiveness on the PPP loan without penalty? So it's essentially the same question.
Sure. Thanks, Dottie. I'll preface this by saying, of course, the PPP program, obviously it's a hot topic. Everybody's asking about it. We could do an entire webinar about the PPP and the CARES Act and could talk for several hours. I won't bore you with all that. I'm happy to answer any questions you have offline, of course, individually if you do, or at the end of this. But there are a few questions here at the end that we did want to touch on, and this is of course one of them. The short answer is for this one that unfortunately, at least that I'm aware of as of right now, there are no known exceptions to the CARES Act's 8-week forgiveness restriction, meaning you're stuck with that time frame in terms of payroll costs and forgiveness. This could change, however, as this develops and as more guidance comes out from the SBA and your lending partners, especially because this CARES Act is meant to encourage these shared work programs like the one here in New York by rewarding states that promote their programs. But that 8-week period is the critical period for forgiveness, and there's nothing that I've seen at this point that changes that.
Thank you, Matt. So let's go to question number 12, and this one, Matt, this is for you as well. Can the employees in the plan also receive the $600 check under the PUC?
Great question. I love this question because it does speak to employee retention generally, and employees are going to have a lot of questions about how much are they going to make, what happens after with the shortfall in their normal wages, and are they eligible for this extra PUC benefit? If you're not familiar with what the PUC is, it just stands for Pandemic Unemployment Compensation. It's one of the new programs created by the CARES Act, and it's that extra flat $600 check that eligible employees receive. So the question gets asked a lot. But there's often this mistaken belief that employees are not laid off, which they're not through this program, that they don't get the benefit. Your employees will be happy to hear that in most cases, if they're eligible for regular benefits, they will receive that check. Partial unemployment benefits paid to employees participating in the program will have their benefits supplemented with the additional $600 at least through July 31st, which is the cutoff date when that program ends. So keep in mind, the goal of this program is to avoid layoffs, encouraging you to retain employees, albeit on reduced hours. But those with hours that are reduced do become eligible for these partial benefits. The CARES Act plays into that, of course, by facilitating your ability to increase operations quickly when it is safe and legal, of course, to do so. But that $600 will be key when you communicate that to your employees, to retaining them, because they're actually, those who are able to get that check are going to make more than they otherwise would if they were working their full 40 hours or less.
That's really where what we hear employers saying is happening, that for certain employees in a certain wage scale, they're demotivated to go to work because they can make more money. So using shared work, that takes that away in that particular category of employees. And from an employer point of view, folks that they really have invested a lot of time and energy, and they're able to keep them on the payroll. They don't want to lose them. So
that's right, Dottie.
It is good. Sorry.
I was just going to add that, this is a common question as companies, the economy begins to reopen eventually and companies start to ramp up again, especially for those who have already made layoffs or furloughs. They get questions and responses from employees when asked to come back to work. Why would they come back when in the short term they can continue to make more money than they otherwise would if they come back and put themselves at risk? So it's something that everybody is wrestling with and struggling with right now. It could go in another direction, but this $600 is a huge benefit to employers and employees alike at this point.
So we have one more question, which I'll get to in a second. I just want to remind our listeners that you can ask a question in the Q&A, and if you get there and you see questions that you want answered that are already listed there, if you would just like them, then that will move those questions to the top of the list, because it's unlikely that we'll get through. We will get through all 10 questions. So the last prepared question is, what impact does a shared work program have on a PPP application or a loan's forgivability if you have already received funds?
Yeah, and none of these PPP questions are easy, admittedly. I'll be the first one to tell you when I don't know all the answers, and I think that's why many of us are struggling, why the BNP is doing great programs like this, because there are so many questions. But I want to do my best to get you some useful information here. So let's take the first part of that question. Having a shared work program in place should not impact your application, because you can still certify through that process that your business is experiencing financial hardship, right? Why else would you need the shared work program? If you didn't have some type of hardship, you probably wouldn't need this. So it shouldn't affect your application, and that's the good news. But as you can probably tell, or you already know, at least 75 of that forgivable amount of your PPP loan must be spent on payroll costs. So things like salary or employee paid health insurance, employer paid 401k contributions, state, local taxes, things like that. By reducing your payroll costs, obviously then your PPP forgivability could be decreased, at least with respect to that wage portion. Now, you could keep fringe benefits in place if you don't do a company-wide benefit, and that would keep that expense up. But up to 25% of that forgiveness eligible funds can then also be used for fixed costs like rent or utilities, those types of things. So if you've already received your PPP funds, the fact that you already received them does not impact your ability to get into the program. You can still enter the program. It's just a matter of how much for forgivability, how many payroll costs can you contribute to that forgivable amount during that 8-week period. Now, it also should not impact your ability to bring back your employees, from furlough or layoff. Emily touched on that. So as long as you bring them back under the PPP program by June 30th, you should be okay. Just remember, and this is important, I've said it a couple times and I'll say it one last time because it is so important. Everybody's asking about this forgivability. It's only the first 8 weeks from the date that your loan gets funded that count towards forgiveness. And it could be decreased by entering this program and you decrease your payroll. That could have an effect on how much that's forgivable. Now, I'll just add a caveat to that, of course, is the remaining monies that are not forgiven, of course, convert to a loan that does have to be paid back. I think it's within 2 years, but they're typically at a very, very low interest rate compared to other credit facilities that are out there, 1% or so.
Excellent. And my understanding of the PPP though is it's the percentage of the is it your payroll cost is how they judge it? So what you're saying is if you are on shared work and your payroll costs have gone down, you kind of can't double dip. You can't get reimbursed for that. Is that what you're saying, Matt, here?
If your payroll costs go down, I mean, that's one part of the amount that can be forgiven, the expenses you can use towards that forgivable amount. So if those go down, then potentially any, forgivable amount would go down in the same percentage during that 8-week period, but keep those other expenses up to the extent that you can to maximize that forgiveness amount.
Okay, let's get to our listeners' questions. The first question is there a maximum amount those on the shared work program can make each week? I'm assuming their salary.
I can take this question. So there is no maximum in terms of compensation. Anyone can be a part of the shared work program. However, there is a maximum benefit that people can earn on the shared work program.
Excellent. Thank you, Emily. Can you do the shared work program now and to bring back an employee that has already been laid off?
Do you want me, or do you want to take
Go ahead, Emily. Go ahead.
So, Daddy, can you repeat that one more time?
Sorry. So the question is, can you do the shared work program with an employee that's already been laid off and bring them back? So let's say someone's there's an employer that has laid some people off, not knowing about the shared work program. They apply for the shared work program. Can they bring back an employee that they've laid off under the program of shared work?
Right. So that goes back to one of the questions that we covered earlier. So if you weren't a part of the shared work program and didn't apply for the shared work program previously, you don't have a plan intact yet, you can apply, it can get approved, and you can have laid off employees come back and be a part of the shared work program, but it can't be retroactive, so just something to keep in mind. But if you had a plan and you just laid some people off, you can bring those laid off employees back and put them on the plan.
Okay, we've got a question. How does PTO apply with those on a shared work program? Can they still take it for the days they would be working?
Sure, I can take that. My understanding is the reduced work hours and the wages must be between 20 and 60% of the regular work hours and the corresponding wages, of course. So PTO can probably be used as long as it doesn't take the employee's wages outside that 20% and 60% kind of requirement. And generally, remember, employees' hours and wages must be equal or essentially the same across each particular unit that you create. So, and an employee must physically, at least work at least one day with your with the business in order to be eligible for the benefits in that particular week. So keep that in mind.
I'm not sure, maybe Emily, this one's for you. Can the shared work program be used and made available to not-for-profits as well?
As far as my understanding goes, and Matt, if you know differently, please feel free to jump in, but yes, in terms of the employer eligibility, they just have to meet the requirements and check the boxes that Matt mentioned earlier. So, the 20 to 60% reduction, the employees have to meet the wage requirements over the past 5 quarters in order to be eligible, but I don't believe there's anything stating that a nonprofit couldn't participate as long as they meet the requirements.
That's right. I think I would just piggyback on that and say, the only restrictions on employers I'm aware of are the ones that Emily already mentioned, but also that they paid unemployment insurance contributions into the system, or in lieu of those contributions, they've elected to reimburse benefits paid to former employees. So add what I said and what Emily said, and the answer to that question is yes.
So this is an interesting question. How is the shared work program different from reducing employees' work part-time, such as 1 day's work reduces employment by 25%? How is it different than that?
Can you clarify? Is there any clarification? I'm not sure exactly what you're asking or what the question is.
I think I'm reading it. I'm reading it exactly as it's written here. How
are they looking for the benefits of using the program?
I think what they're saying is that I don't really shouldn't interpret this. How is the program different from reducing employees' work part-time, such as 1 day's work reduces unemployment by 25%? And I don't know the specifics of that.
Yeah, so if you just reduce somebody's hours by a percentage, you know, of course the business isn't getting the benefit necessarily that comes along with the program, but the employee certainly isn't either. Somebody on regular unemployment, if partial unemployment or full, is going to receive fewer wages, fewer benefits without this program in place than they would if they were on a plan through the business. So the amount that they will receive as partial benefits will be greater than they'd otherwise receive not through this program.
Also, one of the things that, just to add to that I had mentioned earlier, is that you can reduce hours for employees and they can still file with regular unemployment for reduced hours. However, regular unemployment has a maximum amount that someone can make per week to be eligible for unemployment, whereas that doesn't apply for shared work.
This is a question for me, actually. Will the answers to these questions be available in a written format to participants that are on the webinar? The answer to that question is no, there will not be available in a written format, but we will be sending out the recording of the actual session. Okay, next question, and I think we've already answered this. Would participants be eligible for the federal pandemic unemployment compensation program, which is the $600, right?
As long as they're otherwise eligible for regular benefits, yes.
Excellent. We're getting a request. Can you expand on the process of an employee calling in to finish their claim? I'm not exactly sure what that means. Maybe this is the weekly reporting they're asking about?
I think it's referring to what I mentioned earlier, that so the first week of shared work, you have to go online or call, but most people will go online and submit your claim for shared work. And then, as I mentioned, they will reach out to you once you do that and say, to finish your claim, you have to call in. So it is just that. If you go the online route, you're going to go online, you're going to submit your claim for shared work, make sure that you mention the reduction in hours is due to COVID-19, if that's the case. And then you're going to get an email stating, hey, to finish this, you need to call into the shared work department. They're going to give you a number. You call that number. If you get through, fantastic. They're just going to ask you a couple of questions and you'll be good to go. However, the shared work department, just as regular unemployment, is inundated right now, and you may call and not get through, in which case you then have to wait for them to call you back to finish your claim. So it can put a little bit of a hold on you receiving your benefits, but that's just the nature of the beast right now.
This question is, it says if a not-for-profit is self-insured for unemployment insurance, but it would be true of a not-for-profit or a for-profit company, would the shared work program potentially cost the employer more or less out-of-pocket payouts versus regular unemployment?
Yeah, I think that question might be getting at, you know, what kind of hit does your experience rating take? You know, these benefits, and I could be wrong. So if you have another answer, Emily, feel free to chime in. But I would say, you know, all unemployment benefits, partial or otherwise, including the ones through this system, do affect your company's profit or nonprofit experience rating. So in other words, the amount that you pay into the system does take a little bit of a hit, but I think less of a hit collectively in the aggregate if you're using this system to reduce hours than otherwise paying full unemployment benefits.
Do you have anything to add to that, or is that?
That's my understanding as well.
Okay. Can you expand on the requirement that the percentage of employees laid off cannot exceed the percentage of employees in the shared work program? Is the percentage determined as a percentage of all employees or of the employees in each defined unit?
So I'm not totally clear on the question, but I think if we're talking about percentages, are we talking about the 20 to 60% reduction? No?
I'm assuming that that's what this is about, and I don't know that you all said that that the percentage of employees laid off cannot exceed the percentage of employees in shared work. I don't think there's a relationship between those things, is there?
I think what they're referring to, Matt, is when you mentioned that, so when you're applying for the shared work program, they ask how many employees are not going to be laid off because of using the program. And so you had talked a little bit about that, how the purpose is to avoid layoffs. So I think that's what it's referring to.
Okay, so I think just generally, I mean, the DOL talks about that as being a requirement, and there being essentially an equal percentage of employees going into the program or the plan that you're applying for that otherwise would have been laid off. So what they generally don't want to see, although the program is flexible, they don't want to see, 10% of your workforce go into the plan and 30% of it laid off. They'd rather see a greater percentage go into a plan under this program so that you can retain those workers and they can stay on the payroll, at least at some level, as long as it's between 20% and 60%. I hope that answers the question. I think there's some flexibility there, but the DOL could offer some guidance as well.
Also, I just wanted to add to that, at least most recently, I know with plan applications going through that process, they don't ask for a percentage, they ask for a number. So just so everyone's aware, if they do go through the application process and they have this percentage ready, most recently, it's been a number of employees that would not be laid off that they're asking for. However, I can't speak all the time. I know recently, given everything going on with COVID-19, I don't believe they're analyzing that information as closely because they just want people to be keeping people as opposed to laying them off. But in the future, if you're going to be applying, it's a number as opposed to a percentage.
So someone's asking us, what are the negatives to this program? Is there a lot of work for the employer each week? Also, how does this impact, you already answered this question, how does it impact employer unemployment insurance costs? But what are the negatives, and why would someone not want to apply for this?
Emily, you can take this. You're a little bit more in the weeds on it. I don't see a lot of negatives other than the administrative work, the back office stuff I've already mentioned, but maybe you're in touch with your clients on a more day-to-day basis about this.
Sure. So I would say on an overall basis, the positives definitely outweigh the negatives. In terms of administrative work, yes, there is certifications that need to go through every week. If it's a paper form, there's a little bit more administrative work because the employee needs to complete a portion, then they need to give it to you, you need to complete a portion, and then they need to be either faxed or mailed in. However, once you get it down, it's a pretty seamless process. And then if you're doing it online, it's even easier. It's very, very quick. The only thing that, full transparency, as I'm sure everyone's been seeing on the news, the unemployment and shared work departments are completely inundated. They've seen a volume that's unprecedented, that they weren't prepared for, and the backlog is immense. And so we are seeing at this point that some employees haven't received their benefits yet, or maybe if they missed a week, it's taking a while for them to get that payment. Or if it's someone who was on shared work and then was furloughed or laid off, it's taking a while for them to receive one or the other because of the transition. So in a general sense, as I mentioned, I do think the positives much outweigh the negatives, but just so everyone is aware, given the volume of unemployment and shared work going on right now, there may be some complications in terms of the speed at which employees receive payments.
Well, Emily and Matt, thank you so much for your time and expertise. There are a couple straggler questions that have already been answered, so I just want to let everyone know we have recorded this webinar, and if anyone who registered will get an email with a copy of the recording, and of course, the recording will also be put on our COVID-19 page at thepartnership.org. So Emily and Matt, thank you for your time this morning and for all your expertise, and I hope everyone out there has a really great day. Take care.
Thanks, Dottie.